pleasure and honor to see you, Your Royal Highness, and on behalf of the Centre for Strategic Philanthropy at the University of Cambridge, thank you for taking the time to speak with me about the evolving role of philanthropy and related opportunities and risks on the horizon. Aside from formal duties in support of Her Majesty the Queen and on behalf of Her Majesty's government, His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, a graduate of Cambridge himself, continues to be a tireless philanthropic entrepreneur and pioneer, championing an incredible array of social and environmental causes over the past half-century. Working in collaboration with stakeholders from across the public, private and non-profit sectors, His Royal Highness has been a powerful thought and action leader on a range of global issues, supporting hundreds of charities and launching numerous initiatives to transform lives and build sustainable communities within the United Kingdom and around the world.
Well, I must say I'm enormously grateful to you, Badr, for inviting me to reflect on this very important topic, particularly at this critical moment when people across the world are striving to recover from the devastating impacts of the coronavirus pandemic. It certainly seems to me that philanthropy can and indeed must play a critical role in addressing some of the greatest challenges facing humanity. And I'm sure that your Centre for Strategic Philanthropy is set to make a really important contribution in their resolution.
Your Royal Highness, you gave your first rather prescient major speech about the importance of environmental sustainability more than 50 years ago. Fortunately, there is much greater awareness of environmental risks today, but of course, awareness doesn't always translate into tangible action. As we welcome 2021 and enter this decade of delivery for the world's Sustainable Development Goals, what gives you, sir, the most hope that we can reverse the damage done to our natural ecosystems? And what can we do as individuals and institutions to make a meaningful, positive difference in the years to come?
Well, it is my heartfelt belief that the only possible solution to the challenges facing our people and our planet lies in working in harmony with nature's economy rather than against it, which is what we've been doing. And this is why I recently launched the Terra Carta as part of my Sustainable Markets Initiative, which will show how through practical action it is possible to bring economic value into harmony with social and environmental sustainability. After all, we must remember that we are an integral part of nature, and by taking care of nature, we actually take care of ourselves. I must think it gives me greater hope nowadays that we are seeing increasing pressure coming from citizens, consumers and shareholders who are wanting to understand the social and environmental impact of the products and services they buy. The younger generation also, I think, intuitively understand the challenges we face and actively support a more inclusive, equitable and sustainable world.
Of course, your charitable and philanthropic work, sir, spans a host of global issues. Are there some key principles that unite all of these initiatives? And what are the core principles and values that underpin your approach to philanthropy in general?
Well, I suppose the central value guiding my philanthropy, and indeed much of my life, I suppose, is reintegration and harmony. Too often the modern world fragments, divides and disassembles the world around us, thus destroying the essential unity of things as found in nature. So I've always sought to reconcile, to reintegrate, and to heal these divisions in order to restore a sense of what is sacred in terms of man working in harmony with nature in all our activities. And this fragmentation is particularly true, I think, in philanthropy and international development, where the fashion has been to specialize in particular sectors and try to develop them in isolation. But the problem is that all aspects of life are mutually interdependent. Human well-being depends on doing things in an holistic way. And when they are done holistically, they reinforce and multiply each other. So I suppose I've sought to bring activities which others tend to approach in isolation together into an organic whole. And if I were looking for a phrase, it would probably be integrated heritage-led regeneration. And what I mean by it is that culture and heritage are not a peripheral luxury. They are absolutely central to life. And they can, in fact, be the driving force behind doing so much that we care about, from education and health to our built and natural environment to infrastructure. And, of course, most importantly, to beauty and a sense of pride and connection to our local identity and community. In addition, I would say there are three further principles and values that underpin my particular approach. First of all, making an impact. It is absolutely critical that philanthropy has a direct impact on the ground with the target audiences and can ultimately be measured and quoted. For example, in the last 14 years, I've raised something in the region of £70 million in order to demonstrate heritage-led regeneration in action in one of the most deprived and disadvantaged areas of southwest Scotland. I managed just to rescue a unique and unspoilt 18th century house in the area called Dumfries House. Specifically, I felt, in order to use the house and estate as a means of helping to regenerate the local community and provide skills training and real opportunity. As a result, we have radically improved skills, employment, health outcomes, and economic indicators in the area. Secondly, setting an example is another principle. Social and environmental challenges are, of course, highly complex. So the more philanthropists can themselves demonstrate and encourage others to support a systemic approach, the greater the impact. For instance, if we look at the desperately urgent need to restore and regenerate our natural capital in the ocean, in other words, marine ecosystems and fish stocks, the creation of no-take marine protected areas restores biodiversity, increases the fishing yields around them through the spillover of fish, creates employment and household income, and by stopping bottom trawling of all the most damaging practices, substantially reduces carbon emissions. And interestingly, most of the largest no-take areas in the ocean were established in great part by the efforts of non-profit conservation groups that received a generous philanthropic funding. Such an approach, of course, also provides the opportunity to deploy microfinance and microinsurance and to train young people in a variety of professions. And if I may say so, where really enlightened philanthropists lead, the public sector will often sit up and follow with match funding and the scaling up of impact. And then thirdly, and in the same vein, the importance of identifying and addressing challenges. Because I think it is important to recognize that there are visible and less visible drivers of the problems. It is, of course, easy to focus on the visible causes. However, it is often the causes that are below the radar that can, in fact, have the most meaningful impact. For example, here in the United Kingdom, I became more and more concerned about the growing black hole in engineering skills, especially with the older generation of engineers retiring, and then managed to bring together some of the big engineering companies with the teachers in order to try and address the huge gap in the education sector with respect to teaching engineering and to encourage pathways into industry. And this eventually led to the creation of my foundation's STEM strategy, which helps to bridge this particular gap.
Early in 2020, you launched the groundbreaking Sustainable Markets Initiative at the World Economic Forum's annual meeting in Davos to lead and accelerate the global transition to a sustainable future working with the private sector. Can you share with us, sir, your motivations behind this major initiative and what constitutes success as you build a global coalition to achieve its objectives?
Well, in 2015, with the creation of the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Climate Agreement, the world came together to agree on a common direction. However, as we've seen since, consensus and intention, goals and targets are only the first steps. To succeed, there must be an extraordinary practical effort to mobilize the required financial resources, the technical ingenuity and institutional innovation that's needed. And it is this which will determine whether or not our children and grandchildren look back on a series of broken promises or instead reflect on a tipping point at which the world shifted to a more sustainable, equitable and prosperous path. So, having spent many years attempting to work with the private sector to raise awareness of the need for sustainability and long believing that the private sector actually holds the solution to the immense challenges we face, I launched my Sustainable Markets Initiative to try and accelerate the private sector's involvement in making progress towards a sustainable future. And over the past year, since we started, I suppose, in January last year, I've been working to convene, or try to convene, global leaders from across industries and almost every sector of the economy, and then challenge them to identify practical ways to set our planet on a fundamentally more sustainable trajectory. And through these consultations, I'm encouraging the private sector to provide practical leadership, as only it can mobilize the innovation, the scale and resources that are required to transform our global economy much more rapidly.
Your Royal Highness, many of the charitable projects you spearhead are highly entrepreneurial in nature, perhaps by design. The Center for Strategic Philanthropy itself is based at the Cambridge Judge Business School, and one of the projects that is being considered is the creation of a philanthropy accelerator that could identify promising philanthropic initiatives across emerging markets and use elements of entrepreneurship to help them scale impact. To what extent do you feel that we can apply entrepreneurial principles to the practice of philanthropy? And how do you go about incorporating entrepreneurial thinking into your own charitable endeavors?
Philanthropic, social and environmental innovation and entrepreneurship have a critical role to play, but they must also focus on being transformative, I think. The integrated nature of societies and the environment means that we need an interdisciplinary and often what you might call out-of-the-box approach to the development of solutions. And after 10 years of working to try and assist the early pioneers, I am much encouraged to see that there is now a growing movement around the area of social finance through innovative financial instruments like social and development impact bonds, especially in emerging markets. Incidentally, an organization I founded some years ago, the Badr Trust, has, for instance, been working with these types of instruments and has deployed a bond for education in India to help children attain better literacy and numeracy outcomes, which would be very encouraging. And of course, I suppose to some extent, all good philanthropy is entrepreneurial, as it is able to operate outside the constraints of normal funding. It can choose unconventional partners and be unconstrained by the need to make an immediate commercial return. And this is, of course, crucial, as so many of the innovative solutions, being by definition new, have risk profiles and terms that are too high and too long for traditional funders. So philanthropic finance plays a really vital role here in helping to bridge the so-called valley of death of early stage concepts. And by intervening at this vulnerable moment of innovation, philanthropy can lower risk, can reduce the cost of capital, and substantially leverage investment. Indeed, it is, and I have to say, should seek to be, I think, the glue that binds blended finance together. The transformation we need is only achievable if we are able to take these new approaches to scale. And that means that the perceived risk of such investments has to be reduced. And I feel that philanthropy has an absolutely vital role in doing this. In other words, philanthropy alone is not sufficient to fund the solution to the global biodiversity and climate crises. But philanthropy can be catalytic and help to jumpstart bold initiatives and facilitate private investment further along. But of course, at the end of the day, governments have to set the rules of the game and dedicate more public funding to preserve our natural life support system, rather than to destroy it, which unfortunately is what happens today.
When you consider the enormity of the challenges the world is facing, from the current pandemic to climate change and biodiversity loss, it's increasingly clear that we need to find better ways to come together. What do you believe is the single most important shift in thinking that is needed from the philanthropic community as we look to build a more equitable, prosperous, and sustainable future, and not just for some, but for all?
Well, Badr, to be transformational, philanthropists must recognize the integrated nature of the problem and the solution. By perhaps sometimes being too narrowly focused on a specific definition of a topic and unwilling to adjust funding criteria to reflect what is actually needed on the ground, philanthropists can often force recipients to mold their activities to fit into some pretty arbitrary models, which can sometimes have less than satisfactory outcomes. I think it would also be helpful if philanthropists worked with each other locally, regionally, and internationally and collaborated across public, private, and philanthropic sectors. Equally, there is no need to reinvent the wheel every time. Philanthropists, I know, generously found new charities every year. However, a faster and greater impact could often be made if a philanthropist had worked with an established charity in a tailored and smart way, and of course, in partnership.
The key motivation that led me to partner with the University of Cambridge on the establishment of the Centre for Strategic Philanthropy is the rapid growth of the world's so-called emerging markets and the massive impending transfer of wealth that's expected to take place across parts of Africa, the Middle East, and Asia in the coming years. In your work, sir, across many of these regions of the world over the past half century or so, have you witnessed the impact of this trend and its effects on the philanthropic sector? And what would you say are the biggest opportunities for engagement by the next generation of aspiring philanthropists and social sector practitioners that are watching this from these markets and globally?
Well, I have been extremely fortunate in having been able to travel to many countries around the world. And I have so often been inspired by the ingenious, often traditional solutions that have been created to address common human aspirations and challenges. Philanthropists in emerging markets have a real opportunity to leverage these local solutions to deliver localized impact while sharing and showcasing knowledge, impact, and examples more globally. So it seems to me that we have much to learn from applied local knowledge. For example, my foundation has been working with a number of Commonwealth associations and organizations on the whole vexed issue of rapid urbanization in many parts of the world, particularly in Africa. The imminent danger is that such urbanization will most likely be unplanned and lead to ever more desperate slums, along with further disastrous destruction of the natural world and the resources on which we depend for our survival. My foundation has spent over 30 years now in developing the knowledge and practical skills in genuinely sustainable and holistic urban planning, design, and construction in order to provide a community-based and integrated approach to dealing with this overwhelming challenge. To be able to achieve this and prevent a burgeoning disaster for millions of people, the involvement of enlightened and catalytic philanthropy is absolutely vital. And when we see that the world needs to move from billions to trillions of dollars to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and the climate targets, one would hope that of whatever age, those with the means to help rescue humanity and the planet will come forward as quickly as possible. We don't exactly have the luxury of time anymore.
You have previously spoken, sir, about your own personal experience dealing with the dreadful coronavirus. As we continue to take stock of the social and economic effects of the pandemic and its various implications on society at large, what changes do you hope to see as we strive to build back better? And in particular, what do you expect the role of philanthropy to be in this collective effort?
Well, the post-COVID world provides the opportunity for a reset in how we approach things. Rather than building back better, we must build forward better and not merely support a continuation of the technologies and mindset that have created the triple and interrelated crises of this zoonotic pandemic, climate change, and biodiversity loss. And in the years to come, we need to recognize that sustainability, in other words, working within the limits of planetary boundaries for nature, people, and planet, is an absolute imperative. Individually and collectively, we simply have to make sustainability a core value so that together we could build the most durable and prosperous future possible for our children and grandchildren. And if I may say so, and I do hope you will forgive me for mentioning this, but you asked me to take part in this, and so it's your fault, really. In the spirit of collaboration and impact, it would be so marvelous and groundbreaking if philanthropists around the world could possibly connect with my foundation, my Prince's Trust International, and my Sustainable Markets Initiative, so that together we can actually leverage the power of strategic philanthropy to accelerate and build a truly inclusive, equitable, prosperous, and sustainable future for present and future generations.
Your Royal Highness, thank you so very much for honoring us by sharing your incredibly important insights and hopes, and for everything that you have done and are continuing to do towards building sustainable resilience around the world. And speaking to you from here in the United Arab Emirates as we proudly enter our 50th year of establishment, allow me to take this opportunity to wish you and the royal family a healthy, happy, and peaceful year ahead. Thank you once again.